changing closing figures before the closing is a no-no. This question came in via email from the real estate agent at 9:00 p.m. the night before the closing of the transaction. As I review the closing estimate, one thing needs to be removed: the security deposit credit to the buyer. The seller just told me that he approved the tenant to use their security deposit as the last month's rent. Oh no, you are changing my closing figures right before I'm supposed to close. So here is our email answer. Hello, we are closing the escrow tomorrow morning, and it is now 9 p.m. the night before. Unfortunately, it is much too late to stop the closing and too late to change figures on my closing statement. Here are two immediate concerns. First of all, when we close escrow tomorrow, that tenant becomes the buyer's responsibility. Has the buyer even agreed that the tenant is allowed to use this deposit as his last month's rent? Secondly, the buyer relied on this deposit credit to bring in the final amount of funds needed to close. If we remove this credit, then the buyer will be short to close by that amount. To go forward with this closing, we will need the buyer to immediately wire the shortage 8:00 the next morning. By the way, the seller approved the same closing estimate this morning, and he did not say anything about the security deposit. It is much too late to stop the recording, but unless the issue is resolved or the buyer's additional money comes in, we will hold off on dispersing any checks for this closing, particularly the seller's proceeds. Well, I guess that last sentence in my email hit home. Everyone wants to get paid at closing, but how can we pay if we don't have sufficient funds to balance the file? The next morning, we found out the buyer and seller resolved the matter between themselves and no changes were demanded of our figures. Closing was successful with no further midnight drama. Bullet averted, thank goodness. The closing process varies from state to state and even within the state. But in general, in California, the standard practice is that escrow officers set up the closing no later than 3:00 p.m. the day before. By that time, all buyer's lender funds are in, all documents have been signed, reviewed, and queued for recording. If any issues arise after this deadline, particularly if it concerns money, escrow may be able to pull the recording if it is not too late. The fundamental escrow law is that escrow cannot close if not all the money is there or there is a monetary dispute. So here's our tip for the day. If there are any last-minute complications, resolve them before we set up the recording for closing. No desperate phone calls or emails at the 12th hour, please. This would be a good time to mention that some California County Recorder offices will allow recordings anytime during the day, up to 4 p.m., more or less. We call these special recordings. If you are contemplating a special recording, that window period for last-minute issues got even tighter. A normal recording is set up to go at 8:00 a.m. Now, Los Angeles County Recorder, by the way, with their high volume of recordings, does not allow special recordings. Their recordings are all scheduled once a day for 8:00 a.m. Hence, the must set up by 3:00 the day before deadline. So in LA County, you snooze on last-minute issues, you lose on the closing. Thank you very much. This is Juliana 2 for my full April news blog. Go to my website, juliana2.com.